The Hollywood box office can be a cruel mistress, and it's certainly gotten crueler since the pandemic heavily impacted audience attendance and habits. We've had a lot of bombs in recent years, and they happen for all kinds of different factors. Maybe the movie's concept itself is peculiar enough to alienate the mainstream, or maybe the casting crew attached didn't inspire much confidence at all. Whatever the reason, I'm Ewan, you're watching Whatculture, and here are a few recent box office movie flops everyone saw coming. First up, Tron Ares. Ooh, yeah. Despite the passion of its fanbase, the Tron franchise has always firmly been a cult IP with a limited, broader appeal, which, in business terms, seems fundamentally incompatible with a sky-high budget, you would imagine. The original 1982 Tron grossed a decent $50 million against a $17 million budget, while 2010's Tron Legacy grossed a middling $409.9 million at a $170 million budget. It was easy to be pretty skeptical then about the commercial prospects of the third film, called Tron Ares, which, in addition to costing up to $220 million, had the big old albatross around its neck that was Jared Leto's polarizing casting in the lead role. Mediocre marketing that failed to emphasize the film's must-see event appeal didn't help, nor wildly mixed reviews that ensured it failed to attract many beyond the die-hard Tron faithful. Ares ultimately fell far short of box office predictions in its opening weekend, and after 3 weekends at the time of recording, is currently sitting at a brutal global total of barely $120 million, making it one of the biggest blockbuster flops in recent years. And yet, so many people saw this one coming a mile away, and word now indicates that Disney will be putting the big screen Tron franchise on ice for the foreseeable future. Do you also ever find yourself locked in the existential crisis of wanting to watch the 1985 classic Witness starring Harrison Ford and Kelly McGillis, but you don't know where to begin? Because same. Me from the future? You dummy. If you wanted to watch the 1985 classic Witness directed by Peter Weir, all you had to do was sign up to Paramount Plus using the link in the video description. This limited time offer means it's just $2.99 for 2 months. That's $5 off the Essential tier and $10 off Paramount Plus with Showtime, which includes shows like Twin Peaks and Dexter: Original Sin. Witness and Twin Peaks? Sounds like the perfect remedy for those cold winter nights we're having. I'm gonna go sign up right now and ignore this grave violation of the laws of time and space. Sounds like a plan. Mickey 17. Even accepting that director Bong Joon-ho was fresh off the Oscar-winning success of his global mega-hit Parasite, which grossed an astonishing $258.1 million against a mere $11.5 million budget, few were expecting his follow-up Mickey 17 to repeat the same level of success. For one, it's based on a rather niche and strange sci-fi novel, which, in conjunction with a $118 million budget, left the break-even point at almost $300 million. Sci-fi has always been a box office wildcard, considering the larger budgets they typically command, hence why the most successful ones tend to have a broad, easily understandable marketing hook, like Gravity or Interstellar. But Mickey 17 was more of an esoteric black comedy, whose marketing didn't do a particularly stellar job of selling its premise or tone, which, coupled with good but not great reviews, caused it to settle at a hugely disappointing $133.3 million globally. In many respects, this is exactly the sort of wild swing a filmmaker gets to make after winning Best Picture and Best Director Oscars, but it's probably fair to say that Bong won't get to play around with this size of budget again for a good while, if ever. Next up, Elio. There's no denying that the once bulletproof Pixar has struggled massively at the box office since the pandemic, when animated films were often sent direct to streaming and families became conditioned to wait, save money, and just watch them at home. Last year, Inside Out 2 did at least prove the enduring viability of Pixar's tried and true franchises, given that it grossed an eye-watering $1.699 billion worldwide, making it the highest-grossing Hollywood animation of all time. But but that didn't exactly suggest smooth sailing for the studio's original IP. And so there was a lot of skepticism that their new film, Elio, could really go the distance. With the budget estimated to be between $150 to $200 million, that left Elio needing to gross at least $375 million to be deemed a success. But it ended up topping out at just 154. This made it the lowest grossing non-pandemic Pixar film by a huge margin, and was basically the very predictable result of numerous adverse circumstances conspiring against it. Now, for one, the marketing didn't do much to sell the uniqueness of Elio's concept or its characters. It simply looked like a bog-standard lower-tier Pixar film one could easily skip and catch on Disney Plus in a few months' time. As for reviews, well, they were just kind of like, nah. And additionally, attention was stolen away by the far more successful live-action remakes of Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. Not to mention the brilliant K-pop Demon Hunters, which released on Netflix the very same day that Elio hit cinemas. With Elio's failure and the general struggle for original Pixar movies to hit commercially, it's little surprise that within the next few years we're gonna get Toy Story 5, Incredibles 3, and Coco 2. Next up, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. As ridiculous as it might seem to call any movie that grossed almost $600 million a flop, it all comes down to budgeting, and in the case of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, its costs spiraled way out of control. The quote-unquote final Mission Impossible movie's price tag ballooned to an estimated $400 million by the end of its production, said to be a result of delays caused by both the pandemic and Hollywood writers' strikes, resulting in shooting taking more than 2.5 years to actually complete. Using the typical 2.5 times rule for blockbusters, The Final Reckoning therefore needed to gross in the vicinity of $1 billion to turn a profit theatrically, which it fell far short of, ending its run at just under $600 million. For a more modestly priced affair of maybe, I don't know, $200 million, this would have been a fine result. But with such ludicrously high costs and following on from the commercial underperformance of the series' previous entry, Dead Reckoning Part 1, it caused the franchise to rather unceremoniously sputter out at the finish line, even if the movie itself is a pretty good time. A big, bold, beautiful journey. Romance films have struggled massively since the pandemic, with a few exceptions, given the perception of many that they're not cinematic enough to warrant a trip to the movies, hence why so many of them are now produced directly for streaming services. And apparently, even having the A-list likes of Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie can't move the needle all that much, as evidenced by their recent romantic fantasy flop, A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey. Now, to be fair, the picture's fantastical road movie premise was always going to make it a tough sell to some audiences. And the fact it was being helmed by acclaimed art house filmmaker Kogo Nara, whose first two films, Columbus and After Yang, both flopped at the box office, likely didn't help much either. Then you throw in reports of poor test screenings, a $45 million budget, suspiciously quiet marketing that suggested Sony knew they had a dud on their hands, and ultimately wildly mixed reviews, and it was easy to see the film's mere $20 million box office coming a mile away. It'll be interesting to see if this polarizing piece becomes something of a cult success in the years to come, but in terms of big screen business, it was firmly rejected by audiences at large this year. Next up, The Accountant 2. Ben Affleck's 2016 thriller The Accountant was a solid box office hit, grossing an impressive $155.2 million on a $44 million budget, enough that it's genuinely surprising that it took almost an entire decade for a sequel to actually get made. However, during that time, the theatrical landscape changed, well, a lot, with mid-budget action thrillers aimed at adult demographics struggling ever since the pandemic. And so, it probably didn't bode well that The Accountant 2 was budgeted at almost $80 million, almost double the cost of the original in a theatrical environment which was a lot more hostile to its existence. Unsurprisingly, the sequel failed to deliver the results to pay off its larger budget, grossing $103.9 $1.2 million globally. The only saving grace here is that the film was produced and distributed by Amazon, who basically used the theatrical release to promote its subsequent streaming bow on Amazon Prime, where it drew a massive 80 million viewers within its first month on the platform, which should cushion the blow just a wee bit. On the way, Black Bag. Black Bag is, sadly, the sort of movie that struggles to get audiences out of their homes. A more quote-unquote modest genre film without epic CGI set pieces, no matter the plaudits of its exceptional ensemble cast. And Black Bag, to be clear, is one of my favorite movies of the year. In addition to distributor-focused features barely marketing Steven Soderbergh's terrific spy thriller, it was produced for a budget of $60 million, which is an undeniably high figure for a film that largely takes place in just a few distinct locations. Sure, a cast including Cate Blanchett, Michael Fassbender, Naomi Harris, Reggie Jean Page, and Pierce Brosnan isn't going to come cheap, but this still seems like an inordinately high figure given the story's confined nature and overall brevity, clocking in at just 94 minutes. Despite scoring rave reviews from many critics, Black Bag sadly topped out at just $43.4 million globally, though it has quite predictably performed better on streaming, helping to mitigate some of those losses. It's certainly a shame that well-crafted genre fare like this struggles to ignite the box office nowadays, especially with so much talent behind and in front of the camera. But the writing, well, it was probably on the wall from the very get-go. Next up, the Phoenician scheme. Wes Anderson is in an immensely enviable position for any filmmaker to be in, considering that his movies are financed by billionaire Stephen Rails and his production company Indian Paintbrush, ensuring that Anderson seemingly never has to worry about his features underperforming commercially, as they often do. But Anderson's latest film, The Phoenician Scheme, was perhaps the surest box office flop of his career, and it didn't really come down to anything other than the film's title. Even the most Wes Anderson-y Wes Anderson film prior to this had a title that was interesting or at least amusing, but considering that a great many moviegoers have no idea what the hell a Phoenician is and might even struggle to say it to an actual ticket teller, it put the movie on the back foot before anyone had even seen it. Then there's the sentiment among some that Anderson's style is beginning to feel just a bit stale and even self-parodying at this point in his career, and so the novelty factor of this distinctive filmmaking style isn't quite what it used to be. With that in mind, The Phoenician Scheme barely cracked $40 million on a $30 million budget, making it Anderson's lowest grossing release since 2007's The Darjeeling Limited. All it'll take for Anderson to bounce back is a banger like The Grand Budapest Hotel, but even if that doesn't materialize, he's seemingly got a blank check to keep making whatever the hell he wants, and honestly, good for him. Next up, Eddington. Though Ari Aster's first two films, acclaimed horror flicks Hereditary and Midsommar, were massive successes for A24, his third feature, Beau is Afraid, which was a far more ambitious swing of a black comedy horror, was a rather predictable flop. Its mainstream alienating premise rustling up just $12.3 million against a $50 million budget. Everything we heard pre-release about Aster's fourth film, Eddington, was that it was another not particularly commercial genre-bending experiment that served as a satire of the entire COVID era. Okay, so for one, there are many who just aren't interested in watching a movie that revisits the most miserable period of their lives, even through a darkly satirical lens, and on top of this, reviews were wildly mixed, enough that even an all-star cast led by Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, Emma Stone, and Austin Butler couldn't much help it. Even with a more hemmed-in $25 million budget compared to Beau is Afraid, Eddington cracked only $12.7 million, just a fraction more than Aster's previous film. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if these flops back-to-back impact Aster's relationship with A24, but considering he's still one of the most singular filmmaking voices working today, hopefully he'll keep getting to produce his visionary and not for everyone kind of art. Wolfman. In theory, there were many reasons that Wolfman was set to be a solid hit at the box office. For one, it had Lee Winnell working as writer and director, who did a fantastic job reinventing The Invisible Man back in 2020 to both critical and commercial success. With the supremely talented Christopher Abbott and Julia Garner leading the small cast, and a mere $25 million budget, this seemed like an incredibly low-risk, can't-miss project. That was until the months leading up to Wolfman's premiere, when there was significant backlash against the title creature's apparent bleak design, prompting Winnell and company to spend much of the marketing campaign in damage control mode. This, combined with a mid-January release, typically a dumping ground for bad horror movies, did little to help its box office tracking leading up to its release, and Universal ultimately got desperate enough that they spoiled the Wolfman's actual transformation in a clip released shortly before the film even came out. Wildly mixed reviews ultimately dropped just 2 days before its release and basically delivered the death knell to Wolfman's prospects, causing it to end its run at a shockingly low $35.2 million. It was a poor enough result that even the film's own producer, Jason Blum, publicly tweeted his disappointment about it, which, ouch. Next up, Hurry Up Tomorrow. Hurry Up Tomorrow is yet further proof that having two extremely prominent entertainers leading your film means absolutely nothing in the modern theatrical climate, especially if the film itself isn't that good. Even with Jenna Ortega and The Weeknd headlining this psychological thriller from acclaimed director Trey Edward Schultz, who directed It Comes at Night and Waves, the warnings were many and often. The Weeknd proved in HBO's controversial TV series The Idol that his acting skills are quite limited. The intensely vague marketing failed to really tell audiences what the hell this movie was about either, and the review embargo lifted just a day before it hit cinemas. Unsurprisingly, the reviews were absolutely scathing, and even on a seemingly sensible $15 million budget for a production of this size, Hurry Up Tomorrow absolutely tanked, netting just $7.8 million in cinemas. Even Ortega and The Weeknd's respective fandoms couldn't be relied upon to make this a success, which suffered from nuclear word of mouth after its opening weekend and never really recovered, enough that Hurry Up Tomorrow as a whole has largely been forgotten already. Next up, In the Lost Lands. While George R.R. Martin's name might have carried some box office cachet a few years ago, Game of Thrones' calamitous final season pretty much put that to bed for mainstream audiences. As such, the new fantasy actioner In the Lost Lands wasn't even able to coast off the fact that Martin wrote the story on which it is based. But there's one key factor that killed this one dead. It's a $55 million budgeted film from Paul W.S. Anderson, who hasn't enjoyed much commercial success outside of his Mortal Kombat and Resident Evil video game adaptations. Also, the trailer looked absolutely terrible, which that probably didn't help either. Neither Mia Jovovich nor Dave Bautista are box office draws in and of themselves either, and it was scarcely marketed before being quietly drop-kicked into 1,370 North American cinemas earlier this year. Largely negative reviews then sealed the deal, and In the Lost Lands went on to gross a miserable $6.2 million. Ooh, boy, that's a big old stinker. Now, needless to say, it'll be interesting to see if Anderson can still get decently budgeted genre films made after such a catastrophic failure. Next up, The Alto Nights. It's been said time and time again that purely adult-skewing films have been struggling immensely at the box office in recent years, and The Alto Nights provides just further proof of that. Despite starring Robert De Niro in not one but two roles, and being penned by Goodfellas writer Nicholas Pileggi, this crime thriller was a gigantic bomb, netting just $9.6 million on a $50 million budget. This fate was painfully clear from the moment that Warner Brothers decided to call the movie The Alto Nights, a terrible title that tells Joe Public absolutely nothing about the film from a passing glance. As boring and uninspiring inspired as generic crime thriller titles might be, they do ultimately get more eyeballs on a project, and this is definitely a case where a more approachable title would have boosted the box office at least a little. Of course, it didn't help that even cinephiles were likely deterred by mixed negative reviews, ensuring many likely waited to watch the Alto nights on streaming if they even did that at all. Next up, The Life of Chuck. In another timeline where Neon released The Life of Chuck in 2024 and not 2025, it's easy to see it being way more successful, even if it wasn't an outright hit. After all, Mike Flanagan's acclaimed adaptation of Stephen King's fantasy story won the Audience Award at last year's Toronto International Film Festival, which is usually a reliable indicator that a film will be nominated for the Best Picture Oscar nomination in the coming years. But rather than capitalize on all this buzz, Neon left The Life of Chuck on the shelf for 9 whole months, only releasing it this past June when all that pre-release buzz had just basically gone pew. There were certainly other factors to consider as well, though. The title tells you almost nothing about the movie, and the marketing seemed almost afraid of fully detailing its tricky premise, painting it instead as a more straightforward, mawkish melodrama. And finally, even those who wanted to see it couldn't necessarily do so easily, as Neon barely released it into 1,000 cinemas domestically. Though we still don't know the movie's full budget, there's absolutely no way it turned a profit with a box office haul of just $16.2 million. If Neon had struck while the iron was hot last year, it surely would have performed way better. Instead, Flanagan's film was a resolute flop and has little to no chance of scoring any Oscar recognition early next year. Next up, Honey Don't. In 2025, there was always going to be a limited big screen appeal for a neo-noir, no matter who's starring or making it, because it's a genre many are quite content to catch on streaming a few weeks later instead. While one might assume that having one of the Coen brothers, that would be Ethan Coen, in the director's chair might carry some commercial sway, his previous solo venture, last year's Drive Away Dolls, categorically proved that not to be the case. That film, which also starred Margaret Qualley in a different role, grossed just $7.9 million globally, and even with Honey Don't additionally counting Aubrey Plaza, Chris Evans, and Charlie Day among its ensemble, there wasn't that much hope for it. It probably didn't help either that the film misguidedly premiered at Cannes back in May, allowing mixed to negative reviews to linger around for 3 full months before its full premiere. Between this and terrible audience scores, it wasn't in any way shocking that the picture made just $6.7 million theatrically, which was even less than Drive Away Dolls. With a third entry into this thematic B-movie trilogy, Go Beavers, already in the works, it probably wouldn't be a surprise if that one ends up skewing even lower on the box office register. Next up, The Ritual. Horror is one of the most reliable of all genres where box office is concerned. It's pretty much critic-proof, and that's especially true when we're talking about exorcism films. So, on paper, The Ritual should have had something going for it, especially as it stars Al Pacino and Dan Stevens as priests who reluctantly team up to save an allegedly possessed woman. But distributor XYZ Films absolutely buried this one, barely marketing it at all before quietly releasing it this past summer without screening it for most critics, which means that the writing was firmly on the wall. Unsurprisingly, it was near universally panned by the press, and even undemanding audiences craving some basic possession thrills didn't rate it much either. As such, it was easy to predict its $5.7 million final haul, which, oh my god, is pretty bad. While The Ritual's full budget hasn't been publicly disclosed, it clearly wasn't made for a pittance, so there's no chance it turned a profit theatrically. On the way, Love Hurts. Love Hurts is a film that a lot of people were rooting for. A romantic action comedy vehicle for the great Ke Huy Quan, who seemed to finally be getting juicy roles following his 2023 Best Supporting Actor Oscar win for Everything Everywhere All at Once. With its appealing lead actor and a release just before Valentine's Day, there was potential that strong reviews could push the $18 million film to solid-ish success. But as Love Hurts' release neared, it became clear that Universal had no confidence in it. For one, they barely marketed it at all, and then the review embargo lifted just a day before release, and said reviews were also largely negative. Then there's the 83-minute long runtime, which left many assuming that it had been hacked to pieces in post-production, and the fact that many simply found the advertised romance between Quan and the 20 years younger Ariana DeBose totally unappealing. And so, Love Hurts couldn't even recoup its base budget, grossing $17.6 million and basically vanishing off the face of the earth within 2 weekends. A frustrating outcome, as Quan clearly deserves so much better than this. Next up, Ballerina. While you can't really blame Lionsgate for wanting to expand the John Wick series with spin-offs aplenty, there is a fundamental, inescapable fact that Keanu Reeves is John Wick, both as a character and a franchise. Although I'm hoping that theory isn't true, because the spin-off involving Donnie Yen and Rina Sawayama, I'm really rooting for that one. But yes, anyway, even though Reeves was heavily marketed as making a supporting appearance in Ballerina, it simply wasn't enough to lure most fans of the series out of the house. As kick-ass and skilled an actress as Ana de Armas is, Ballerina's marketing largely made it look like a paint-the-numbers action thriller with action sequences a fair few rungs below the main John Wick franchise. All that pre-release hubbub about extensive reshoots probably didn't help shift that perception either. It was perfect wait for streaming fodder, which is hardly what any studio bankrolling a film to the tune of $90 million wants to hear, which is just $10 million less than the cost of John Wick Chapter 4, despite Reeves appearing for just a few brief scenes. Ballerina ended up grossing just $137.2 million, leaving it miles away from profitability and grossing less than every single mainline Wick movie except the first, which was produced for just $30 million back in 2014. As such, well, it's little surprise that Lionsgate is now pushing extra hard for John Wick Chapter 5 to go into production, whatever that might look like considering the ending of Chapter 4, and also the state of Keanu Reeves' knees. And lastly, we have The Unbreakable Boy. It's never, ever a good sign when a film sits on the studio shelf for years, and so it was a given that biographical drama The Unbreakable Boy was destined to flop. Even though faith-based films tend to perform well at the box office with the demographic who will reliably turn up to support them, Lionsgate didn't make much effort at all with this particular one. The movie was shot in late 2020 and didn't release until February this year, apparently a result of the political climate in the US and the want to release The Unbreakable Boy at the quote-unquote right time, which is very suspicious and weird. But I digress. Despite landing an A cinema score and a stonking 97% audience approval rating on the tomato meter, it seems that awareness just wasn't there for it, perhaps in part because Lionsgate released it in under 2,000 theaters domestically. Given the wildly hit-and-miss track record of production company Kingdom Story Company, it was easy to doubt the prospects of this particular film, especially with such an egregious and weird release delay.